Sunday morning's a good time to check out New York City and make sure it's all still there. The workers and the shoppers have cleared the streets on Sunday, and on this October 24th of 1982, the air is crisp and clean. Visibility is excellent at 10:30 a.m.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I wanna be a part of it. New York, New York.
Our helicopter view shows us that the Statue of Liberty still lifts her lamp beside the Golden Door. The Empire State Building still stands tall, visible far across the river and well into New Jersey. The rivers still flow on either side of Manhattan. The trees in Central Park still hold their leaves, but they've turned from green to red and gold. Those who have gone to public places this morning are in church. The bells are heard from the great cathedrals to the neighborhood chapels. But on this particular Sunday, the rest of New York is not asleep. On certain streets of the 5 boroughs, a crowd that will grow to 2 million people has been gathering since the early morning hours, because this is the day of the great New York City Marathon, an idea that's grown in a dozen years from a pleasure run for the members of a single club to an assemblage containing the world's greatest marathon runners, as well as those who are out to conquer only themselves. As you look at this live picture, they're gathered 16,000 strong by the toll booths of the Verrazzano Narrows Bridge on Staten Island. Somewhere in that crowd of athletes, there's a Nobel Prize winner and a United States Senator, an 83-year-old man, and a waiter carrying a bottle of champagne on a tray. ABC Sports will follow the great race live all the way, from Staten Island to Brooklyn, to Queens and the Bronx, and finally to Central Park and the finish line in Manhattan. Stand by now for a day like none other in the big city. The day of the great marathon in New York, New York.
Fine, I'm king of the hill, head of the list, cream of the crop at the top of the heap. My little town.
For the next 3 hours, ABC Sports brings you live coverage of the New York City Marathon. Brought to you by Money. You don't have to be rich to have money. By Maxwell House, the coffee that gives you that good to the last drop feeling. By a tool for modern times, the IBM personal computer. And by Hertz, the car rental company that's #1 for everyone.
Come on, come through.
What a day it should be. Good morning, I'm Jim McKay reporting from our ABC anchor position, just a couple hundred yards from the finish line, actually, although we're in our ABC New York studios. The numbers are dazzling, of course. 16,000 runners, 2 million spectators, 4,500 volunteers, 28 live television cameras in helicopters, on towers of bridges, on moving vehicles. Who knows how many microphones? 22 foreign countries are carrying our coverage. But what that is all about, really, is the human stories. 16,000 of them, one for every runner, and we're going to try to tell you a good many of those as we go along. Remarkably, in the men's division, with who knows how many thousands, probably 11,000 or so, I think, men running in this contest, most people have narrowed it down to a 2-man contest between a 24-year-old man who came here with his family fleeing from Castro's Cuba a good many years ago when he was an infant almost, and a farm boy from Rush City, Minnesota. More about that, however, from our expert on the sport of men's track and field, all-time great American middle-distance runner, Marty LaQuarrie. How do you see this?
Well, Jim, that's a well-deserved battle, and we're looking forward to it. Alberto Salazar set the world best here last year, has never disappointed any fans in his marathoning, and Dick Beardsley has earned the title of the man who could pull an upset by pushing Salazar to Salazar's admittedly toughest race of his life when he came within 2 seconds of him last year at the Boston Marathon. And that's something I'd really like to see. 2 men pushing each other for a little over 2 hours every step of the way and coming down to 2 seconds. So it could happen again here. Beardsley really exudes a lot of confidence, and of course Salazar is Mr. Confidence himself.
No question of that. Let's bring in now our expert on the women's division of the race, Diana Nyad. When they had the first one here 12 years ago, there was only one lady who tried to sneak into the race. Now there are thousands of them.
There are thousands, and it's the most exceptional and competitive field that the women's race has ever come to. There's 7 women in the world who have broken 2:30. 3 of them are in this race today. If you are disappointed at hearing now in your homes that Allison Rowe, last year's winner and the current world champion, world record holder, will not be here, don't be, because it's a perfect day. Greta Weitz is in great shape. She's 3-time winner here. She wants this race, and she wants the world record. And we'll be showing you the other faces and names of the great women who are going to push her all day. And who knows, we may see an upset.
And Allison Rowe, by the way, will be seen because she's going to be in the studio with us a little bit later on to offer her comments on the race. Now, out at the start line right now is another of our ABC commentators, ABC Sports' Jim Lampley. How's it look, Jim?
Well, Jim, the first impression that any New Yorker would have stepping out here is what a spectacular day. We only get about a dozen days all year that are this clear and perfectly beautiful. I'm sure all the runners are going to feel the same way, too, until they get up to the crest of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge here and get into a fairly stiff headwind, a bit stronger, I think, than the headwind they ran into at the start of last year's race. What anticipation. Some of them have been out here since as early as 7 o'clock this morning. For the last hour, they've been doing alpha state, self-hypnosis, mind projection. The real guys, the top professionals, the people who really know what they're doing, have prepared, of course, all year for this. Alberto Salazar is right here stationed at the very front of the pack and ready to take off toward Central Park in just a few minutes. Jim?
As we said, there's a human story in every runner. Down there are airplane pilots and architects, artists and attorneys, bankers, bartenders, beauticians, and corporation presidents. There are stewardesses and scientists running today, doctors, dentists, and clergymen. Runners from all 50 states and 68 foreign countries have come to the great metropolis for the experience of a lifetime, to run through all 5 boroughs of New York, New York on a Sunday morning in October. The temperature at the start, they tell us, 47 degrees, a 15-mile-an-hour headwind out of the northeast. We'll be back live in a minute.
These vagabond shoes.
A look from the helicopter high overhead at the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. An Italian navigator sailed through those narrows hundreds of years ago, little knowing that one day the longest single suspension bridge in the world would be across that very spot. It's named after him, after Verrazano the Italian. And there, the scene once again. Marty, you've been in there. You ran in this race once, set a record by passing 14,000 runners, I think. What's it feel like there at the start?
Well, it's unlike anything I ever took part of in track, and probably unique in sports, whether you're at the front of those 16,000 or in the back, or especially in the middle. It's an awesome feeling. But I'm really impressed by the look we saw on Salazar's face a few minutes ago. Just a man with so much tension and nervousness. I could see his face muscles. I remember that same feeling. You're so nervous, so drained, so anxious to get started. You can't even smile. Your face muscles are just so tight, and he really looks intense right now.
Less than 30 seconds to the start, about 15 seconds probably. They'll start on the dot of 10:40. There's the bridge they'll be running across. There's Brooklyn, another bridge of New York City. They'll be going across 12 miles of Brooklyn. Almost half the race takes place in the streets of Brooklyn, New York, but they'll also be going into Queens, over the 59th Street Bridge, into Manhattan, up First Avenue, into the Bronx, into Harlem, where the disc jockeys will be playing. There's Mayor Ed Koch firing the starting cannon, and they're off and running in the New York City Marathon 1982.
Well, Jim, as I said, it's different than any other sports event. One thing you've got to think about, whether you're Alberto Salazar or anyone in the pack, is the possibility of somebody clipping your heel from behind and tripping. If you were to trip in that pack, even if it was a Salazar, you might be finished for the day, because it'd be impossible for people to pull back and not step on you. So there's an awful lot of just making sure that no one is right next to you, keeping your own space guarded so that you can get off and get a good start. And of course, for Salazar and the front runners, they could almost blow the next 2 hours by getting a poor start in this race.
The first portion of this race, Diana, is in a sense segregated. The women and the first-time men runners will be running on the other side of the roadway, right?
Yes, to give the women a fair start, they've been given the whole side of one bridge, and actually they'll be running that way through Brooklyn somewhat, so that they don't have to run back in the pack. As you can see here, some of the people back here are going to take several minutes just to get to the starting line of this race.
And yet, remarkably, they say they get all 16,000 started in a minute and 40 seconds. Now, you see all that stuff lying in the street. That's clothing that the runners have discarded. About 14,000 of them, they say, will leave it in bags with their names on it. Huge trucks will take it to the finish line where they have to reclaim it. But some people just leave clothing there, and for the first time this year, the Volunteers of America are going to pick up that clothing, and it will be distributed very intelligently. Again, the shot from the helicopter. By the way, on that right-hand tower, we have a camera and cameraman 500 feet. That's about a 50-story building above the roadway, 700 feet above the waters of the New York Narrows. There's a look from that tower camera as the lead runners begin to come up towards the apex of the bridge. There's another view you'll be seeing from a camera that's right at the top of the road surface. It's certainly an impressive sight on television, but it's a little different being down there. It's almost scary because the bridge is actually shaking, and I think the land mass, when they touch down to land on the other side, will actually be noticeably shaking for half a mile away. It's an amazing feeling, and if you're in the front and you know what's behind you, it's almost like those bad dreams you have about tidal waves, and there is a tidal wave of people behind you, and you can't decide you want to stop now and tie your shoe. Some of the spotters actually said last year, as they would sit waiting for the runners to come with their cups of water and so on, they would hear the rumble of the earth as the runners would approach. Well, and someone out in Brooklyn said that they could actually feel them before they heard them, that the street begins to give and to vibrate a little bit. You could actually see a minute or so ago our cameraman on top of that tower of the bridge, just before you saw the picture from his camera. Way in the distance, the island of Manhattan. And there are several times, as you'll see as we go along, when the runners will be able to see Manhattan, and it must look so close and so tempting, and yet at several of those points they still have about half the race to go. I guess the real pity is that the people in the middle of the pack there can't take the time to look off to their right and left and see the beautiful sight, because as I mentioned earlier, if you look away, you may step on someone next to you, or that may happen to you. So you're really focusing on the 2 feet of space around you and nothing else. People like Salazar now should be able to be getting their way to the front of the pack. As Jim Lampley mentioned, after the first mile, as they get to the crest of the bridge, there will be quite a wind, so we may see some of the favorites trying to tuck in behind some of the front runners for the first going and get a little bit of shelter from that wind. Headed downhill now. Incidentally, the buses carrying the runners to the start line left from Lincoln Center. The first buses at 5 o'clock this morning. As for the spectators, well, the counterman at the New Wave coffee shop on Madison Avenue at 74th this morning, when I was having breakfast there, said that when he came in through Brooklyn at 6:30 this morning, there were people staking out their positions on the curb just to watch the race, and many of them will stay till the last runners come through, which is going to be, at 5 or 6 o'clock this afternoon. Well, it's interesting to me that Alberto Salazar, I could just make him out, is already in front of the pack, looks to be even leading the race. And, you know, in retrospect, perhaps the runners down there defer to him and let him do whatever he wants, because coincidentally, Dick Beardsley was probably more famous for the last 2 years, more famous in running his 2:08 in Boston for being the man who tripped Bill Rogers from behind in this race about 2 years ago. So certainly no one wants to be known as the fellow who bumped into Salazar at the beginning. So I guess maybe he could do just about anything he wants in the first 2 miles. Marty, excuse me, when they spoke of a headwind today, I was thinking maybe Salazar and Beardsley would kind of tuck themselves back in for a while. But as you say, it looks like he might be. Yeah, that's why it's very interesting to me, because of the wind and because Salazar has said, well, I really want to win here. He's got a streak going, 2 races. He really wants to win. And if you want to win the race and you're not chasing a record, it would be wise to tuck in the early part of the race, let the other runners do some leading, let them psychologically deal with the aspect of leading, because we know from last year Salazar will be leading and doing a lot of psychological fighting as the race progresses. You know, Marty, there was a time, as you know, when hot dogs would go out in front, you know, unknown runners, just to take the lead for a minute. They can't do that anymore because the good men run so fast. We'll be right back live. There is the scene at the start line. They've all departed now. All 16,000, as we said, amazingly get across the start line in about a minute and 40 seconds. And there is our crew on top of that tower 700 feet above the waters of the Narrows, 500 feet above the roadway, still totally filled with runners. This peaceful army of 16,000 that is about to invade the borough of Brooklyn, which has seen battles, by the way, not only street battles, but back in the Revolution, there was, in fact, the Battle of Brooklyn, an important part of the Battle of Long Island. Well, once again, Diana, the women running in a separate road course at this point. They actually started at a different point, didn't they?
Yes, you can see here the barrier along the bridge. On the left side of that barrier would have been what they call the elite men, the best men, and several other groups. On the right side of that barrier would be the elite women and other groups of men. And the women actually started about 200 yards ahead of the men, some 200 yards. But the whole race evens out. Once they come off the bridge, they take different routes, and they all run exactly 26.2 miles.
Incidentally, they did measure precisely as they could, the actual footsteps that Salazar took last year in setting his world's best mark. And they say not only ran the whole distance, he ran about 10 yards longer. Now they figure that out, but they said they did. And this year, just to make doubly sure, in a sense, the course has been lengthened. It's a long explanation, but it assures the fact that everybody will run at least the complete distance. There's Greta Weitz. Is it not?
This is Greta Weitz.
Yep. In the blue.
Tucked in behind her, I'm trying to catch a number in the red. I'm sorry, I can't see her, but we got...
The girl on her left shoulder, I know, is the Italian girl, Fogli.
There you go, Fogli. And behind her, we've got several women in this pack anyway. Greta Weitz is right there, but we still got 4 or 5 women running right in this pack with the lead women.
And the first-time men. Interestingly, every year there are several thousand first-timers, and every year more than 90% of the first-timers actually finish the race. They take them long, long hours, but they eventually get there.
Our first report on the first mile split is that it was over 5 minutes, which they're about 10 seconds off of last year's pace, which is a little bit strange considering all the buildup and the tension that was there at the start. You would think that someone would go out very quickly in that first mile, but if Salazar's out in front and can control the pace and is really truthful in saying that he's concerned about winning and not a fast time, he may dictate the pace the entire way. Although I should mention that somewhere around 16 miles we would expect Rodolfo Gomez to make a move, or Dick Beardsley to make some kind of a move on Salazar at 16 miles, because they feel that they can't wait until the last mile and try to outkick Alberto.
If you might be wondering whether it's any strain on that bridge roadway to have this many people on it at once, well, the total length of wire in those cables is 143,000 miles. There are 26,000 wires in each cable, and you can see there are quite a few cables holding up the bridge. A remarkable engineering work that cost more than $300 million to build. They talked for more than half a century about linking Staten Island with the rest of New York, and it finally took place back in the 1960s. Before that, the Staten Island Ferry was the only way you could get to the island of Manhattan. It still runs, of course, still one of the great transportation bargains. Still coming down the other side is coming downhill. It's an appreciable downhill slope, Marty. Something of a problem in that uses different muscles than going uphill?
It does, especially in the latter parts of a race. If your thigh muscles, quadriceps are getting tired and you have to run down a steep slope, it does hurt because you're using a different set of muscles. It's very fortunate in this race in that the biggest hills are probably right at the start. I think the toughest one is right at the start there. It's about a 22% grade. Right. It's almost a mile long, but you're excited, you're fresh, and you don't even know it. If that hill came at the 20-mile mark, there might not be 16,000 people willing to run this race.
Well, now the leaders are in Brooklyn. They go across 92nd Street, then to 4th Avenue, and 4th Avenue they'll go about 4 long miles. So we'll take a break and return to our live coverage of New York City Marathon. And now they're on 4th Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. If you're familiar with New York at all, imagine walking 107 city blocks. Well, they're going to do 107 blocks on 4th Avenue alone, and that's just a short part of the marathon course. There's the pack, Salazar right out in front.
Right out there controlling the race at this point, but what a pack of runners. And I'm sure they've been going fairly quickly over the first 2 miles. I see Otis Sanders on the far left of the screen, who is a New York born and bred runner, the fastest man from New York the last couple of years in this race. They all look very comfortable. We're having a little bit of trouble getting the exact split, but I have a feeling that the race is not as fast as it was last year.
I also noticed number 18, Inge Simonsen of Norway, was right there with Salazar, I believe. Isn't that he right there in front?
Yes, and Otis Sanders is now cut over to the center of the road and is helping by breaking some of that breeze off of Salazar. Sanders, about a month ago in the Nike Marathon on the West Coast, went out and set a very fast pace, faded to the 5th or 6th place at the end, but perhaps this is the break we need. Someone who is willing to go out and throw caution to the wind and pick the pace up and make this a little bit more exciting, because that's a huge pack of about 40 top runners just bunched right in there. Something's got to happen soon. And when we're on the tighter shot, you can always spot Salazar by his orange, very vivid day-glow shorts. But there's a look at that top pack again as they run down 4th Avenue. Lead vehicle in front of them. We'll be going to that for commentary as the race goes on. Brooklyn baseball spoke with a southern accent. Red Barber.
No hits by Bevins. 8 2/3 innings. 2 men out. Last of the 9th. The pitch to Lavagettos. Swung on. There's a drive hit out toward the right field corner. Hendrick is going back. He can't get it. It's off the wall for a base hit. Here comes the tying run. And here comes the winning run.
Brooklyn, like all of New York, is an amalgam of neighborhoods, each with its own shops, playgrounds, and places of worship, each with its own flavor. But Brooklyn has more. It has Coney Island, where 1 million people will jam the beaches on a summer holiday weekend, where famous hot dogs are consumed by the tens of thousands. How many cities have a vacation island you can get to on the subway? But the neighborhoods are where Brooklyn lives. Jewish, Italian, black, Hispanic, Polish, Irish, name your nationality and you can find it in Brooklyn. And with the people, their foods from around the world, and the blend of old country customs that together form the culture of America. Many street games had their origin in Brooklyn, like stickball. It's played all over New York, actually, and a good many neighborhoods probably would claim to have played it first. It's remarkable how many games can be played while dodging traffic. Jumping rope takes a minimum of sidewalk space. A good many famous football players started on the hard pan of Brooklyn. This one is called Chinese handball. And for the more sophisticated, horseback riding in the park. What is Brooklyn? Listen to its people.
Brooklyn is really like a great place to come into contact with different ethnic groups.
All right.
Brooklyn is the greatest place to live. Wonderful.
Right here in Prospect Park, you can find people of different ethnic backgrounds. That's what's beautiful to me, is that, like, it's the United Nations right here. You can go from one side of the park to the other. You know, just like the trees have different colors, the leaves and all, you can find that just on the fields alone, you know, with different people.
The way I find most people easy to get along with, strike up a conversation. I met him a couple of years running in the park, and we've been running ever since.
Love Brooklyn, yeah, I love coming back. Even though I live in Manhattan, I still love Brooklyn.
From the promenade on Brooklyn Heights, lovers enjoy one of the world's great views through the spider web-like strands of the Brooklyn Bridge. The view is called Manhattan. A bit of the flavor of the borough through which the runners are now going in the New York City Marathon. Along 4th Avenue there, as I said, 107 city blocks they'll go until eventually they reach the Williamsburg Savings Bank building, take a left and then a right on Lafayette Avenue. But still 4th Avenue right now, and that must look like infinity as you're going down it, Marty. The building must never seem to get closer.
Well, for the lead runners right now, I don't think they're looking at the scenery too much. It's a very tense time because no one has taken an aggressive position and gone out and set a pace. And you know, as the marathon unfolds, it's kind of like a chess game. You have an end game, you have a middle game, and you also have a first move. And you remember when Fisher and Spassky were jostling about, and Fisher would sit there for 1 hour before making the first move, even though he probably made the decision 3 days ago. It's kind of the same thing going on right now. Salazar is making making a statement, really, in these first 5 or 6 miles that, look, I'm not going out this year and doing all the work and helping you guys run record pace, because the field is so good this year that there is a possibility in everyone's mind, including Salazar, no matter how confident he is, that if he goes out and just runs record pace, that someone might sit right on his tail and come by him in the last mile. Now, there's not much of a chance of that happening to Salazar in the last mile, but there is one man in the field running a marathon for the first time, Carlos Lopes of Portugal, who this summer sat on Alberto Salazar for 6 miles and then kicked by him in the last 100 yards to run the second fastest 10,000 meters of all time. So perhaps Salazar is mindful of some of these things, that it's now like an Olympic Games. No matter how great you are, when there's a field this good, you just can't do as you please and go out and set the pace and expect to run away. Someone out of that top 10 will be there with him at the end.
That other shot you saw of a man on crutches made another point about the New York City Marathon. There are people here and in the race for many, many reasons. Now, the unofficial time we get, sounds very unofficial, Marty, is 3 miles in 15:08 for the men. Is that realistic to you?
It is, in light of what we're seeing also, that no one has taken an aggressive pace out. They're about 20 seconds slower than last year, and it's almost already getting dangerous to even think about world records. There would have to be some very fast miles thrown in during the race to make up those 20 seconds.
There's Salazar, excuse me, in the Dayglow pants there with the white shirt with the orange stripe on it. Simonson of Norway on the right of your screen. Who else can you pick out?
Well, Malcolm East is on his left side there with the black top. He's well known for being up in the front early in races. I can't really see some of the, there with the hat on the left-hand side, Dick Beardsley, definitely now up there. He's got white gloves on. They couldn't ask for better weather. 47 degrees we hear, clear. The air is just so crisp. I'd have to say that right now it looks like the conditions are better than they were last year. There was a bothering wind almost the whole way last year.
Okay, Diana, here is Greta Weitz, pretty much in front, as expected. World record holder formally, now trying to regain it from Allison Rowe, who said it last year.
Yes, Greta Weitz is up here. Also in the lead pack of the women, we've got the Russian Gumarov, who's done some fast times on the track this summer. We've got Julie Brown, who led the race last year. I might say that their split unofficially at the 3 mile was 17:58, and that would be very close to 6 minutes a mile. They've got to run 5:33 a mile to set the world record here, so I only suspect there was a very heavy headwind out of the blocks.
Why the white gloves? It's not to be formal, I know.
Well, Allison wore them last year also. The hands having the least circulation at the fingertips. The feet are the same thing, but they're getting exercise down there. The hands are just to keep them warm. It's, you know, even though it's a perfect race temperature for the runners, the hands do tend to get cold, and this way they can keep those fingertips warm.
It was 47 degrees at the start. Of course, it'll be getting warmer as they get to get away from the water, and also as the day goes on. They say the high today will be about 55.
Yeah, what's interesting about the women's race is it's the opposite of what's happening in the men's. In the men's, Salazar holds the world's best. He doesn't really need to break the record, so he's just playing cat and mouse. But we see Greta, who normally in past races would hang around in the back for the early part of the race, who for, you know, the first, for the past year, she hasn't held the world record. So by her being up front, she probably has the attitude, I'm going after the record. I'm going to go out. She's conservative on the pace right now, but she looks like she is chasing the record.
Well, she's also not finished a marathon in 2 years. The last 2 she was in, she turned up injured and couldn't finish. So the men's race goes on, the women's race goes on, and Central Park awaits them in a couple of hours. You're looking through the lens of a camera on top of the Williamsburg Bank building in Brooklyn, New York, looking down 4th Avenue as the runners approach. The latest unofficial time on the men, 19:59 for 4 miles. That means they ran the 4th mile in 4 minutes, 51 seconds. They're beginning to pick it up.
Well, what they're also doing is for that third to fourth mile of the race and what they did last year for that mile, they're not too far off the pace. I think what happened was maybe the wind over the bridge was a little stiffer than last year, but as they get down into the more sheltered areas, they're coming closer to the times that they ran for each of those individual miles last year, so they could make it up.
They're running now through the Park Slope section of Brooklyn, a large Hispanic-American community there. That's also the place where the Battle of Brooklyn took place that we talked about before. Simonsen of Norway in the blue uniform there, the chunky, husky man, and Salazar obscured at the moment just behind him. You can't see those Dayglow fans right now.
Well, this was the point of the race last year where Louis Kinney from Ireland was out by 20, 30 yards and really pushing the pace. That is not happening. I can't pick out Beardsley right now. He seems to be on
that white painter's cap on, unless he took it off. He was up with the leaders, but we don't see him there now. Our word is that he, oh yes, just in the right of your picture. See that little white cap bobbing up and down?
Yes, he's you know, dropped back 10 yards and come back up. I think I see the Soviet athlete in the foreground of the camera. He seems to have a lot of potential, but I'd be surprised if any of the Soviet athletes run exceedingly well. They had a real tough trip getting over here. They only got here 2 nights before the race. Well, Beardsley is out there
there he
away
is on
from
the
the
left
crowd,
right now.
Now moving up, getting up to Salazar's shoulder.
So there are the two men favored in this race, running almost side by side in the orange pants and the white shirt. Salazar, the world record holder, in the white cap and the white pants. Just on his right shoulder is Dick Beardsley. These men finished 2 seconds apart, remember, in the Boston Marathon. Remember also that Salazar has only run 3 marathons in his life. In the first one here in New York 2 years ago, he said, in my first marathon, I think I can win and I think I can run in under 2 hours and 10 minutes. He did both. Last year, he came back, said, I think I can win again, and set a world's best time. He did that. Then he ran in the world-famous Boston Marathon for the first time. Didn't make any too specific predictions there, and as we said, it turned out he only won by 2 seconds, having to come from behind to beat Beardsley.
Well, they both are better runners than they were last year. That's what makes this so exciting. Salazar, over the summer, has set American records on the track at 5,000 meters and 10,000 meters. So we know that he's getting faster. We know also that he's getting stronger. Beardsley, on the other hand, is strictly a marathon runner. He doesn't compete on the track. We don't get times to compare him by, but we do know that in the laboratory, they are able to pinpoint that Beardsley is in much better shape than he was at Boston. For instance, when they tested him around the time at Boston on the treadmill, his heartbeat would get up to 188 beats per minute at the end of a certain stress that they put him under. Now, before this race, his heartbeat has only gone up to 166. This is something that the USOC has picked out about 5 athletes to go through this very close monitoring. So we know that Beardsley is very physically ready, and the way he talks, we know that he feels ready. Now he's got the physiological data to back up what we just used to think was a gut feeling, oh, I feel great.
You notice that unofficially they showed Biambanchi of Italy as the leader. I couldn't pick him out, but on the screen, that's what these spotters have been sending us. Alberto Salazar, just right up with the leaders, technically perhaps not leading the race, but as you can see, he's within a step or so of the lead at all times. As I said, he's only running 3 marathons in his life. A little bit earlier, I talked to Alberto about that very subject. Let's go back to that interview right now. In the first marathon of his life in 1980, Alberto Salazar had the audacity to say that he would finish first out of 14,000 in less than 2:10. I asked him about that race.
I was surprised at how easy it felt. I had heard so much of the mythical marathon and the 20-mile wall and everything, and yet I just stayed with the leaders there, kind of scared the whole way about what was going to happen later in the race, and all of a sudden I found myself at the 20-mile point and feeling very fresh, and with only one other runner there, Rodolfo Gomez from Mexico, and at that point, or within a mile or so, I started to pull away, and from there I just coasted to the finish, and I was surprised at having won that easily in that fast a time.
After that, he took another year to prepare, then predict not only victory, but a world record.
See, the second marathon, I remember being nervous throughout the race, being worried that I might slip off record pace. I had made that prediction, and I felt the pressure of it during the race. Felt like the pace was pretty fast, but yet we were still a little bit off record pace through the first 10 miles or so. So I was a little bit worried. And then at about the 17-mile point, I think I overreacted to that feeling of being nervous about the pace and started to run a bit too fast. Last 6 miles, I just remember feeling that I had the race under control and that I was going to get the record, and I could just, in fact, actually slow down a little and maintain that good feeling and be sure of finishing in the record time.
New fields to conquer. Boston, the daddy of all marathons. His recollections?
On race day, the heat came up, and it was about a 70-degree day, and I was worried about Beardsley, I guess, because I knew he'd been trained down in Atlanta, and I knew that the heat just wasn't going to affect him as much as it was us. And in the race, I remember just never feeling that good during the entire race, and with about 7 miles to go, really hurting and just trying to hang on to Beardsley as long as I could. And finally, as we got closer and closer to the finish line, realizing that, you know, the further we got into the race, the more chance I had of winning because I could outsprint him at the end.
Lifetime record, 3 marathons, 3 victories. What about a prediction for the 1982 New York City Marathon?
It's always hard to predict beforehand in terms of either time or how the other runners are going to run. I just feel that I'm in good condition and I'm definitely in shape to run under 2:09, and I think if pressed, I'm in good enough shape to beat my time from last year. As to what will actually happen will mostly depend, though, on how the other runners run.
So your prediction is not quite as specific as it's been the past 2 years.
Right. I'd say that my main priority this year is just to come in here and win. Last year, I had the priority of breaking the world's record as well as winning. This year, I've got a slight foot problem, which I anticipate probably shouldn't bother me too much, but I don't want to take any chances with it. So I'd rather just try for the win rather than try and go at too hard a pace at some time during the race and risk the foot going out on me.
Well, as of now, he's where he wants to be. The unofficial time at 6 miles, 29:42. That's still 35 seconds behind the pace of last year. However, the last mile they just did in 4:49 unofficially. That would be a 2:06:30 pace if they could keep that up. So Alberto Salazar still leading. Now, a long way from here is the finish line, but look at the preparations that have been made, the bridge under which they will go. The grandstands already are filled. Difficult to see them under the trees there, but they are there. And all along the streets, remember, a crowd estimated at 2 million people gathered for the New York City Marathon. The World Trade Center on the left, that great tall structure that you see. You can see the Empire State Building and I believe the Chrysler Building, all the other huddled skyscrapers of lower Manhattan and midtown Manhattan. But the runners are still a long way from there, far from the halfway mark, as a matter of fact. Riding on a vehicle in front of the women's pack is Catherine Switzer, a former winner of the women's division. Catherine, we have a good picture of you. Just behind you, the women's runners. What are your observations?
Well, I think that Greta Weitz looks fantastic as predicted. It was interesting. It was a slow start. They're still on a slower pace than a world record, but everybody stuck with Greta. Everybody hoping to break 2:30, but there are some surprises with her. Look on her left in the red shirt, the white pants. That's Nadezhda Gubarova from the Soviet Union. She was one of our unknowns, and she is hanging right with Greta. And also up there is the winner of the marathon, Charlotta Teska. Charlotta has had a virus since the European Championships. She said she wasn't going to do anything today, but she's running very strongly. And tucked in behind her are a lot of predictable women who we thought would be up there, including Laura Foglia from Rome, who won the Rome Marathon, and she's been improving in every performance. It's a very competitive race down here.
Okay, Catherine, thanks very much. We'll be coming back to you for later reports, and that fills us in a great deal, Diane, I think, as to who's running in the front. The 7th mile for the men, 34 minutes, 35 seconds. That's 33 seconds slower than last year's pace. The last mile they did in 4:53.
Well, the record is certainly not in jeopardy yet, but to me, this is exciting. This is what I want to see. I want to see a race right to the finish. I want to see some men tested out there, and I think this is what Beardsley and Salazar would like to settle also. Salazar being the defending champion and the record holder, really has everything to lose by going out now and pushing the pace and going after that record. He doesn't want to get excited, run after that record and have his two main competitors just sitting right on him. Carlos Lopes is right up there biding his time. He hasn't run a marathon, but he's the man that in Salazar's mind, he must know that Lopes can outkick him at the finish. He's done it on the track. Salazar now is getting the reputation of a great runner, but great in the sense that Ron Clark of Australia was. Very strong mentally, but just a natural gift of speed, of being able to pick up and run the last 200 meters fast. Salazar doesn't have that. Carlos Lopes from Portugal does have that. Another fella, a U.S. entrant, John Sinclair, does have that ability to pick up in the last 400 yards and sprint very well. Sinclair has only run one marathon, 2:13. He said it was a very easy race. There would be a big sprint, some big moves that would take place there and in the park, but it's shaping up that it could be like another Boston, with Salazar making some surges and Beardsley making some surges.
Gomez of Mexico maybe could be in there too. He claims that he's run a 4:01 mile. So.
Well, Gomez is definitely someone to be reckoned with. He's won 4 of his last 5 marathons. The only one he lost was this one last year to Salazar. So Salazar and Beardsley, the longer the pace lags, the more trouble that they could possibly have, the more chance there is of an upset. And that's the thing that is probably weighing in their minds now. Salazar is the dominant factor, but he can't play it too cute.
Okay, there is Greta Weitz again, so let's turn to the women's story. Diana Nyad and Allison Rowe has moved in with us now.
Here is the women's story. Greta Weitz out in the lead. Again, we've got several women behind her. I want to ask you, Allison, as we've got the luxury of having you here in the studio, why have they gone out so slow? At the 5-6 mile mark now, they're going 5:50 miles, way off the world record pace.
Well, I'm of the opinion at the moment that Greta Weitz is certainly after the world record, but she started out with a very conservative pace. Perhaps the headwind is having some effect, and I think that very soon the pace will pick up and become a lot faster.
This is, by the way, Allison Rowe, last year's champion and current world record holder. Why aren't you in the race? Let them all know we know.
I have recovered from an injury which I've been suffering with for the last 6 to 8 weeks. I've had an Achilles tendon problem and just feel that it's not quite strong enough to run today. But I'll be back here next year.
One more question while we've got you. Greta, as we said, is off the pace, but she said in many of her interviews at the press conferences this week that the world record was not important. She's dropped out of this race last year. She had to drop out of Boston. She wants to win this thing. Is that why you think she's holding back? She'll use her great speed later in the race?
Yes, she certainly does have speed advantage, and I think that Greta is going to use that in the last stages of the race. She has a lot of tough competitors here today. Lorraine Moller has just received 2 bronze medals at the Commonwealth Games. There are other track runners with speed, and so she's going to be pushed if she leaves it too late.
Do you think the fact that she hasn't finished her last 2 marathons, in fact hasn't finished one in 2 years, maybe making her a little more conservative out there?
I think certainly it's going to have a psychological effect. That will be going through her mind at various stages of the race. And this is something that she's going to have to contend with. She's going to have to be very strong, and she's going to have to push herself.
All right, well, your comments are very valuable, and we hope to get you back in later in the race.
That's for sure. Why don't we go back out to our coverage of the New York City Marathon right now. As we said, they are well short of the halfway mark still. This is the women's pack. Greta Weitz in the blue shirt there.
Let me say real quickly, Jim, before we go to commercial, that's Julie Brown in the white and blue. Last year, she led the race at 10 miles. She worked very hard this year to try to run the race the opposite way. Maybe I should lead to commercial.
This portion of ABC Sports' exclusive coverage of the 1982 New York City Marathon is brought to you by Anheuser-Busch St. Louis, brewers of Michelob. Some things speak for themselves. This is Jim McKay with Marty LaQuarrie and Diana Nyad at our ABC anchor position. You see the greens and reds and golds of the trees of Central Park right now. Manhattan, the East River, and Long Island City. Queens, Brooklyn, you can almost see a bit of several boroughs at this point. The runners are still in the streets of Brooklyn. Remember, they run almost half the race, 12 miles in Brooklyn. Here is a look If you've never been to New York, I can't imagine what an exciting scene this must be right here. The huddled skyscrapers of the island of Manhattan. It's just a very narrow little island, but there is so much crammed into it of every sort, from the very best to sometimes just the very worst, that it makes it the most exciting island that I've ever been on, for one. The 8th mile for the men puts them at 39 minutes, 38 seconds. That's 37 seconds off last year's record pace of Salazar. The last mile in 5:03. We conjecture that might have been uphill a little bit, do you think, Marty?
I think so, and that's one of the things we have to think about. You know, it would be possible for them to pick up the pace and knock a few seconds off each mile and come back, get close to the record. But you have to remember that Salazar last year threw in some tremendous miles. The 16th mile that he ran in around 4:37. So how much better than that can you do? He ran some pretty hot ones in there. I think it's going to be more of a 3- or 4-man race, at least until they get into Central Park.
Okay, well, it certainly is still a pack of a good many runners right now, but in front is Alberto Salazar, not letting anybody get in front of him. He is obviously controlling the pace of the race all the way. And that's quite a trick to do, isn't it, Marty? I know it is in horse racing, for example, just going around one time, let's say, or as in the Preakness last year, when the young jockey, cowboy Jack Cannell, outmaneuvered, as far as pace was concerned, the great Phil Shoemaker.
That's right, and it takes a lot of combinations to be able to dictate the pace. You know, some people can even dictate the pace from the back of the pack because of their reputations. And there is something in a first-time miler's mind, like Carlos Lopes, who has beaten Salazar, knows he has a chance to win, but in his mind he's saying, well, I feel good, this is slow, but Salazar knows what he's doing. It happened in the Olympics many years ago, where one runner came up to the other running for his first time and asked if the pace was fast or slow, and got a certain answer and decided it was too slow for him and went on to win. So in your mind, you're always deferring to the men with experience like Beardsley and Salazar. And now Beardsley he took a little bit of a lead there. One thing that he may try to do, see, Salazar can put on these spurts and hold them for about a mile. Beardsley is not going to play the game and go after Salazar during those miles, but perhaps in the turns, or when they have a place where they go for one block and make a sharp right turn, that's where Beardsley's going to try and get a few quick steps and open a lead. So his strategy of where he would like to make his spurts is different than Salazar's.
And way back and further back all the time are the others of the 16,000 runners, trying to prove something to themselves that at least one time they can go 26 miles, 385 yards.